The story begins with a lantern. Its flame, weak and unsteady, flickers against damp stone walls. Imagine a cold cellar, half buried beneath an abandoned manor on the outskirts of a fog-drenched village. Dust hangs in the air like suspended ash. On a wooden table, warped with age, lies a fragment of parchment, stained, frayed, and torn, but unmistakably deliberate. Strange markings run across it, not mere coastlines or mountain ranges, but shapes that seem to resist recognition. At first glance, one might call it a map, but look closer, and the geography begins to shift, as if the ink refuses to settle on a single form. This fragment is all that remains of Silas Blackwood's final work, or at least it is the only piece that ever surfaced. Silas was no ordinary cartographer. In the late 1800s, when explorers, scholars, and surveyors were charting the last blank spaces of the known world, he stood apart. While others sought trade routes or colonial claims, Silas searched for something stranger, something whispered about in old sailors' taverns and locked away in monasteries where forbidden texts gathered dust. He was brilliant, yes, but reclusive. Those who met him described a tall, gaunt man with eyes that seemed to map everything they looked upon. He rarely spoke of his personal life. His journals, when discovered years later, contained meticulous notes about rivers, mountains, and borders, but also symbols that had no correspondence to any land on Earth. Some who read his work claimed he was trying to chart not just the world, but the unseen currents that flowed beneath it. Then, suddenly, Silas disappeared. No body, no grave, just silence, and whispers of an unfinished atlas he had been working on. A project said to contain maps of places that should not exist. Travelers claim to have seen him in distant lands, sketching feverishly in the rainforests of South America, or crouched against the icy cliffs of the north. But these sightings always dissolved into rumor. What we know for certain is this: before his disappearance, Silas sent letters to a small circle of confidants. Each letter hinted at discoveries too dangerous to share openly. One line in particular recurs in several accounts: beware the blank spaces. They are not empty. They are watching. The chilling phrase spread like wildfire among scholars. Was Silas unraveling, or had he stumbled onto something that terrified him into cryptic warnings? When his estate was finally opened after years of abandonment, nothing was left but dust and mildew, except for one locked trunk. Inside, scraps of parchment, leather bindings, and a single intact page from what must have been the infamous unfinished atlas. That page now rests in a private collection, unseen by the public. But descriptions survive. It shows a landmass that does not and cannot exist. The shape is twisted, with coastlines that bleed into labyrinths, rivers that split into dozens of unnatural branches, and symbols, circles, crosses, and spirals that seem to pulse with meaning. Some swore the markings weren't ink at all, but a substance that shimmered under candlelight, like something alive. The story of Silas Blackwood has become less a tale of history and more of legend. He is remembered not for the maps he completed, but for the one he never finished. An atlas of places beyond the known world. A book that, according to rumor, was not just unfinished because of his disappearance, but because the act of finishing it was impossible. Why? Some say he saw too much. Others believe he was taken by whatever forces he tried to chart. And still, a darker possibility remains that the atlas is not a record of geography at all, but a guide, a doorway meant to lure others into the same fate. Even now, when scholars whisper about Blackwood, they never ask what he mapped. They ask instead, what was waiting for him in the places no other cartographer dared to draw? So I ask you, what if the maps we trust, the ones hanging in classrooms and printed in books, are only fragments of a greater truth? What if the empty spaces, the deserts, the depths, the untouched forests are blank not because they are unexplored, but because they are hiding something? This is where our journey begins, with the phantom cartographer, with his unfinished atlas, with the forbidden maps that whisper of places that should never be seen. And tonight, we open the first page. The atlas itself is said to be heavy, bound in cracked leather darkened by years of handling, the cover strangely warm to the touch. Its clasp is iron, rusted, but still strong, as though meant to contain more than just parchment. When opened, the spine creaks like a long-forgotten door. Inside, the pages shift with a faint, unsettling sigh, as if they've been waiting, patiently, too patiently, for human eyes to return. The parchment is unlike any other, thick, yellowed, and veined with fibers that look disturbingly organic, almost like strands of sinew pressed into paper. Some claim the pages bleed faintly when cut, though no one dares to test this rumor. At first glance, the maps appear almost ordinary. Coastlines, mountains, rivers, all carefully inked in steady hand. But the longer one studies them, the more the geography unravels. Rivers flow uphill. Roads spiral into themselves, looping endlessly. Some regions shimmer faintly, as though the ink refuses to stay flat, giving the illusion of depth. One page depicts what looks like a familiar continent, but distorted, its borders stretched like melted wax. Cities are marked where none should exist. Dense clusters in the heart of the ocean, symbols of towers rising from waves. Another page shows a range of mountains twisted into shapes that resemble ribs, arching across the land like the skeletal remains of a giant buried in stone. Scholars who have seen reproductions report feeling a creeping dizziness, as if their sense of balance is slowly being drained. A map is supposed to orient you. This atlas disorients instead. Beyond geography, there are symbols no modern scholar can decipher. Circles with jagged spokes, spirals that vanish into themselves, and what appear to be crude silhouettes of figures. Humanoid, yet stretched, elongated, distorted. Each of these symbols is annotated with spidery handwriting, tiny notes in the margins, written in a language that appears to be English at first glance, but quickly slips into unfamiliar forms. One phrase, repeated across several maps, stands out. Not for the living. The ink around these words looks darker, fresher, as though it resists aging, unlike the rest of the page. Perhaps the most unsettling detail reported by those who have handled the atlas is this. The maps change, subtly but undeniably. What was once a jagged coastline may, upon a second viewing, appear smoothed and elongated. A lake that seemed circular yesterday becomes crescent-shaped today. A path disappears from one valley and reappears in another. No one has yet explained this phenomenon. Some insist it is an illusion of memory, the human mind struggling to reconcile strange images. But others are convinced the atlas is alive, still being drawn, as though Silas's hand never stopped moving. Academics have tried, of course, to rationalize the atlas. Some say it represents psychological cartography, a mapping of Silas's inner mind, not the outer world. Others argue it's allegory, a symbolic attempt to chart myths and legends rather than reality. But then there are the darker theories, that the atlas records real places, but places that do not exist in our version of the world. Parallel landscapes, hidden dimensions, realms that press against ours, bleeding through in stories of haunted forests, lost islands, and cursed ruins. A few whisper that the atlas is unfinished because Silas was charting a world that cannot be fully mapped. A world that resists boundaries, that punishes anyone who dares to outline it. One private collector who owns the only surviving page of the atlas claimed that the map fragment in his possession once showed nothing but an expanse of ocean. Years later, when he returned to it, faint outlines of islands had begun to appear. He swore the page had changed while locked in a vault. When he traced one of the islands with his finger, he reported hearing a low, thrumming hum, like distant thunder beneath the earth. That night, his dreams were filled with images of endless coastlines, shore after shore, each stranger than the last. He woke gasping for air, as though he had swallowed seawater. The collector has since gone silent. Some say he sold the fragment. Others believe he destroyed it. But there are those who whisper that the fragment destroyed him. And now, as we study these impossible maps together, I must ask you, what do you see? A clever fabrication? The fevered imagination of a man who wandered too far into solitude? Or do you feel it too? That creeping sense that these places are not imaginary, but waiting? Look again at the page in your mind's eye. Trace the impossible rivers. Feel the pull of those spirals. Ask yourself, why does the map resist clarity? Why does it not want to be finished? The atlas doesn't just record places. It tempts, it beckons, and with each glance, with each whispered annotation, it dares you to follow where Silas once walked. Unfinished though it is, the atlas radiates an invitation. But to what? To knowledge or to oblivion? Those who studied its pages too long claimed to hear a voice, low, steady, persistent, asking them to continue the cartographer's work, to fill in the blanks, to draw what Silas could not. But what happens when a human hand completes a map that was never meant for human eyes? That, perhaps, is the most dangerous question of all. Among all the pages of Silas Blackwood's unfinished atlas, one stands apart. It is known among the few who have glimpsed it as the map of the Hollow Coast. At first glance, it resembles an ordinary shoreline, jagged cliffs, inlets, bays, but then you notice the details. Along the coast are markings of structures, fortresses, towers, even settlements, yet none of them correspond to any known civilization. Stranger still, the coastline is lined with dozens of black notations, small triangular symbols that Silas's notes identify only with one chilling word: mouths. What did he mean by mouths? Some believe he was marking caves or coves. Others insist he was recording something far more grotesque. Vast openings in the cliffs that resembled mouths, not carved by nature, but formed with uncanny symmetry, as though the land itself was alive and waiting to swallow. Silas's notes are fragmented. One line is clear: the mouths breathe when the tide rises. Imagine that. Cliffs that inhale and exhale with the pull of the sea. Some explorers who claim to have followed Blackwood's hints describe hearing deep, resonant sighs echoing from caves along certain forgotten coasts, as though the land itself mourned. This part of the atlas seems to align eerily with folklore. In Nordic traditions, there are whispers of the grinning fjords, cliffs said to smile with open jaws at ships that strayed too close. Sailors told tales of vessels swallowed whole, never to re-emerge. In South American lore, fishermen along certain desolate coasts spoke of cliffs that ate the air, pulling men into suffocating darkness. Could these legends have been echoes of the same place? Did Silas find the common root beneath all the stories, stitching them together in his atlas? But the Hollow Coast holds more than strange landforms. On the map itself, tiny inked figures appear along the shoreline. They are humanoid, drawn with quick strokes, small heads, elongated limbs. They cluster near the mouths, standing as though in worship or waiting for something. In one margin note, Silas scribbled, "They do not fish. They do not build. They only wait." What were they waiting for? And why would a cartographer, a man of reason, of land and measure, record such things with the same precision as rivers and mountains? This is where the atlas shifts from unsettling to terrifying. The notes from this section of the Hollow Coast grow increasingly frantic. His script breaks apart, letters slanting, words spiraling into one another. He writes of dreams where he hears waves lapping against his bed, of shadows crawling across the edges of his maps, of whispers urging him to follow the shore. And then there is one final, chilling note beneath the hollow coast map. Do not linger. The coast draws nearer, even when you are far inland. How can a coastline draw nearer? Unless Silas meant it literally. But by studying, by mapping, he had pulled it closer, dragging some other geography into our own. Historians who study maritime disappearances note an odd pattern. Entire ships lost, with no storm, no evidence. Regions of coast reported in sailors' logs that vanish from records decades later. One 17th century Spanish account describes a bay lined with the mouths of stone, which sang at dusk. The crew was never heard from again. Could Silas's hollow coast be the explanation behind such tales? Not metaphor, but record. Those close to Silas in his final years reported that he looked increasingly gaunt, his skin pale, his lips often chapped as if salt water had burned them. He spoke of tides and horizons as if they were alive, and he developed a peculiar habit. Whenever speaking to others, he would often glance toward the floor, as though expecting waves to lap against his feet. It was as if he was no longer charting the coastlines. He was becoming part of them. The hollow coast is but one section of the unfinished atlas, but it shows us the deeper nature of Silas's work. These maps were not mere curiosities, nor hallucinations of a man gone mad. They were records of places that perhaps should never have been drawn. And the more he drew, the more those places seemed to seep into his reality. A coast that draws nearer, a cliff that breathes, figures that stand in endless silence. These are not metaphors. They are warnings. If a map can bring such places closer, if the act of representation itself acts as a bridge, then perhaps Silas did not vanish at all. Perhaps he was claimed, not by madness, but by the very landscapes he sought to record. So I ask you now, what lies beyond the known world? If these forbidden geographies are real, then what does it mean for our own maps, our own certainty of where the world begins and ends? Look at any globe or atlas today, and you will see blank spaces, stretches of ocean, unexplored depths, unnamed trenches. Are they blank because no one has been there, or because what lies there is better left unseen? Perhaps Silas Blackwood's unfinished atlas was not incomplete by accident. Perhaps it could never be finished, because every attempt to do so brings us closer to what waits at the edges of our understanding. And if you dare to follow the phantom cartographer, the hollow coast is only the beginning. When studying Silas Blackwood's unfinished atlas, scholars focus not only on the maps, but on the margins. The notes, scribbles, and fragmented sentences scattered like whispers across the parchment. His handwriting, normally sharp and precise, becomes erratic, slanted, almost frantic. Certain words are underlined again and again, as though he was trying to shout through the ink. Among the most unsettling are phrases such as, "The land breathes," "The horizon listens," "Do not chart the waters when the moon is black." These notes are not the rational commentary of a geographer. They are warnings, confessions, and sometimes pleas. In several places, Silas abandons words altogether, filling the margins with spirals. At first glance, they look decorative, meaningless doodles. But closer examination reveals something stranger. Each spiral is slightly different, composed of dots, slashes, and tiny angles. When arranged in sequence, some researchers realized the spirals could be read as a code. One scholar attempted to reconstruct the cipher. When translated, the spirals revealed a chilling message. They are not symbols. They are entrances. Entrances to what? The message offers no answer, but it raises a disturbing thought. Perhaps Silas was not just drawing symbols. He was encoding pathways, doors etched in ink, doorways that might be more than metaphorical. As the atlas progresses, words become less recognizable. What begins in English drifts into strange hybrids of Latin, Old Norse, and languages no one can identify. One margin note seems to shift mid-sentence, half legible, half incomprehensible, as though Silas's mind was slipping into another tongue. Some linguists describe this as glossolalia, nonsense words born of delirium. Others believe it to be a form of received language, a message not of Silas's creation. But one whispered into his mind, if that is true, then who or what was dictating to him? One interpretation stands out among the rest. The unfinished atlas is not a guidebook for discovery. It is a warning. A desperate attempt by Silas to record his findings while simultaneously urging others not to follow. His notes often end abruptly, as though cut short. On one page, beneath a distorted mountain range that twists like coiled ribs, Silas scrawled, "Stop here. Do not draw beyond this line. The mountain is not a mountain." Such warnings suggest he was aware of the danger, that to map these places was to summon them, to give them presence in our world. Yet he kept mapping. Why? Curiosity? Obsession? Or was he compelled by something beyond his control? If Silas's atlas is real, the implications are staggering. Geography as we know it becomes only a thin veil, a curated version of reality. What if entire regions exist beyond our recognition, carefully excluded from our maps, not by accident, but by necessity? If the atlas is a warning, then the question is, what happens if we ignore it? What if someone, in their thirst for discovery, completes the maps Silas left unfinished? The final pages of the atlas are nearly blank, except for faint pencil marks and broken lines that fade into nothing. They suggest coastlines that were never completed, mountain ranges that vanish mid-stroke. Some speculate Silas was interrupted before he could finish, but others argue that he stopped deliberately, realizing too late that completion would mean catastrophe. And yet, on the very last page, there is a note, small, faint, almost erased. It reads, "The last line must never be drawn. To finish the map is to open it." There is a story, though unverified, of a man who obtained one of the unfinished pages and attempted to complete it. He carefully traced the faded pencil lines, inking them into clarity. That night, he claimed the map shifted in his hands, the new coastline pulsing like a vein. He reported hearing rushing waves in his ears, though he lived miles from the sea. Days later, he vanished. All that remained was the page, now showing a completed coastline no one could identify. Whether the story is true or not, it mirrors Silas's warning. To finish is to open. What, then, is the Atlas? A book of maps? A warning? A doorway? Or all three? And if it is a doorway, then to where? One thing is certain. The more you study it, the more it ceases to be about ink and parchment. It becomes about thresholds, about what lies just outside the boundaries of our perception, pressing against the edges of our world, waiting for someone reckless enough to draw the final line. Some say the Atlas whispers that if you stare too long at its spirals and symbols, you begin to hear faint words in the back of your mind. A voice, low and insistent, urging you to continue Silas's work, to pick up where he left off. And that is perhaps the greatest danger of all. Not that the Atlas reveals forbidden knowledge, but that it recruits, that it tempts others into becoming the next cartographer, the next victim, the next name lost to the blank spaces on the map. For more than a century, the story of Silas Blackwood has drifted through scholarly circles and occult whispers. His Atlas, unfinished and forbidden, sits like a shadow in history, never fully confirmed, never fully denied. Official records mention his expeditions, but leave blank the final years of his life. Museums refuse to display the fragments. Private collectors lock them away, swearing that ownership brings only misfortune. And so, the Atlas remains, shrouded in silence. But silence, as you know, often hides the loudest truths. The greatest question of all, what became of Silas? Did he simply vanish into obscurity, lost on some uncharted voyage? Or was his disappearance something stranger, a consequence of the very maps he tried to complete? Some insist he was claimed by the hollow coast, that he walked into one of those breathing cliffs and never returned. Others say he crossed into one of his own spirals, a doorway drawn by his hand, and stepped into a world not meant for human eyes. A few whisper that he is still alive, not in body, but within the Atlas itself. That every line, every word, carries a fragment of his voice. If that were true, then reading his Atlas isn't just reading a book. It's listening to a man who has been trapped for more than 100 years. To this day, historians and occultists remain divided. One camp insists that Silas was a visionary, glimpsing truths hidden beneath the surface of our world. Another argues he was insane, his mind fractured by isolation and obsession. But there is a third possibility, darker than both, that he was neither mad nor enlightened, but used. That something beyond our world guided his hand, shaping his maps, ensuring the atlas would survive long enough to find new eyes. If so, then the atlas is not history. It is bait. Consider this. Why are we drawn to stories like this? Why do we linger on tales of forbidden maps and vanished explorers? Perhaps it is the same lure that pulled Silas toward the blank spaces, the human compulsion to know, even when knowing brings danger. Think about it. When you look at a modern map, your eyes drift not to the crowded cities, but to the empty stretches, the blank deserts, the black depths of the ocean. We are drawn to what is missing. And that is exactly where the atlas leads. Here is where the story reaches you. You, sitting safely with the glow of a screen before you. You are the reader, the listener, the witness. And yet, even now, part of you feels the pull. Don't deny it. As I described the hollow coast, as I spoke of the spirals, you pictured them in your mind, didn't you? You traced them, if only in thought. That is how it begins. The atlas is not just a book. It is an idea. And ideas spread. They grow stronger with every person who dares to imagine them. By listening, you have already taken the first step onto Silas's path. So we ask again, where do the blank spaces truly lead? Are the mouths of the hollow coast waiting for ships that will never return? Are the spirals merely symbols, or are they doors? Did Silas vanish? Or did he complete a map that no human should? The answers remain hidden, but the questions themselves are dangerous. Because once asked, they cannot be unasked. Once imagined, they cannot be forgotten. Though incomplete, the atlas continues to evolve. Stories of new fragments surface every decade. Pages that seem to appear in estate sales, libraries, or hidden collections. They vanish again, just as quickly, sometimes taking their owners with them. And every time a new fragment appears, it contains more than before. More lines, more coastlines, more symbols, as if the atlas is finishing itself, line by line, feeding on human curiosity. It is unfinished only because it is waiting for you. Listen closely now. Do you hear it? The faint pull at the edge of thought. The whisper, urging you to look beyond the borders of your world. To wonder what lies just off the page, just over the horizon. That is the atlas. It doesn't need to be in your hands. It only needs to be in your mind. And now it is. Perhaps Silas was right. Perhaps the last line must never be drawn. But what if someone ignores the warning? What if someone decides to finish the atlas not with ink and parchment, but with imagination? Wouldn't that be enough? The truth is, we will never know. And maybe, just maybe, we are safer that way. Among the rumors surrounding Silas Blackwood's lost atlas, one stands above all: the story of the final page. It is said to have surfaced only once, in the private library of a collector in Prague, sometime in the 1970s. The page, if it was real, bore no coastline, No mountains, no rivers. Only a single black spiral, drawn with such precision, it seemed to sink into the parchment itself. The collector allegedly spent 3 nights staring into it. On the 4th, he vanished from his locked study. The page was gone with him. Some dismiss this as a fable. Others believe it was the true end of the Atlas, and that Silas did complete his work. If so, the question remains, what happens when the spiral is followed to its center? Recall Silas's final words, scrawled in the margins. The last line must never be drawn. But what if it already has been? What if the Atlas isn't missing at all, but merely moving, choosing who sees it and when? If the warning was true, then someone, somewhere, has already crossed the point of no return. And perhaps that is why new coastlines appear in fragments that resurface. Perhaps the map is still expanding, because someone is still feeding it. Think carefully. As you've listened to this story, you've already pictured the hollow coast. You've imagined the spiral. You've seen the ink in your mind's eye. That's how it spreads. Not by touch, not by paper, by thought. Every listener becomes a silent cartographer, filling in the blank spaces with imagination. And imagination, as Silas learned, is the most dangerous ink of all. So tell me, when you close your eyes tonight, when your mind drifts into the dark, will you resist drawing another line? Or will you, without meaning to, finish what he began? Those who seek the Atlas rarely keep it long. Historians misplace it. Collectors vanish. Pages burn in mysterious fires. And yet, always the fragments return. Always the story finds another listener, which leaves us with one unsettling possibility. The Atlas doesn't want to be destroyed. It wants to be remembered. It wants to be continued. And now it has you. Perhaps that is why you are here. Perhaps you are meant to hear this story, to carry it forward. Perhaps the Atlas doesn't end with Silas Blackwood. It ends with the one who dares to finish it. That could be a scholar, a dreamer, an explorer, or you. Because if the Atlas is unfinished, then someone must finish it. And once you've seen the spiral, once you've heard the whispers, the responsibility is yours. Somewhere in the silence between words, in the gaps between maps, Silas Blackwood's voice still lingers. Not in ink, not in parchment, in the minds of those who remember him. And if you listen closely, closer than you should, you may hear it now, a faint murmur, urging you to take the next step, to draw the next line, to continue his work. Picture it, a table in a darkened room. A candle flickers. A blank page rests before you. Beside it, a quill. Do you pick it up? Do you place the tip against the page? Do you begin the line that Silas dared not? Be careful, because once you begin, the page will not stay blank for long. and the Atlas will not let you stop. So this is where the story leaves you, with an unanswered question, with a decision that is not mine to make. Will you let the Atlas remain unfinished, buried in silence, or will you complete the spiral and see where it leads? The choice is yours. But remember, every map is a door, and once a door is drawn, it cannot be closed.